Hi, my name is Sarah, and this is another episode of A Different View. And as usual, I'm looking for a different view, and I hope you are too, because right now we all need a different view of America. The media isn't doing a really good job of telling us what's really happening right now, and a lot of people are out there fear-mongering because 2020 has been a scary year and we're facing a presidential election in a couple of days, and right now there are a lot of people who don't think the presidential election is actually going to be decided on Tuesday. I didn't want to do any, commit fear-mongering, but we really need to talk about what could actually happen on Tuesday and what could actually happen the day after Tuesday or maybe a week after Tuesday. The way I see it, there are three outcomes of what will happen on Tuesday. Outcome number one, Donald Trump has a decisive victory. And by a decisive victory, I don't mean just skating over the line, getting 270 electoral college votes plus like a little bit. A decisive victory would mean he'd need to, run the field, as they say in sports. He'd need to bring in like 320 plus. Well, no, maybe not 320 plus, but somewhere around there. It would have to be a decisive victory. It would have to be such a decisive victory that it wouldn't matter what 2 or 3 extra states did. A decisive victory means you win with change. You win with enough, room to run that it doesn't matter if, maybe the state of Wisconsin doesn't get its act together and doesn't finish counting votes until Thanksgiving or something, which theoretically could happen right now because we're having a mainly mail-in election, it looks like right now. And a lot of states have never really done that many mail-in ballots. And one of the problems with mail-in ballots is that, people in the media like to say there isn't, voter fraud. But if you remember what happened back in 2000, I don't really, but I did some research. People were finding cars parked in airports in Florida with, a bag of extra ballots here and a bag of extra ballots there. And if you have that happening in enough places, people get scared for good reason. So, option number one is Donald Trump has enough of a decisive victory that it doesn't really matter if a couple of states don't get their acts together or if a couple of individual counties within a couple of specific states don't get their acts together and can't really count the ballots. It does matter to me because it should matter to America if we can, run an election right. And it will matter for a lot of the down ballot races because local elections matter too. People are talking about the presidential election right now, but local elections matter too. But if Donald Trump has enough of a decisive victory, it's not that huge a deal if a couple of states don't get their acts together. So that's option number one. Option number two is it's a close election, like a really close election, and people count, and it comes down to the wire, and we're still talking about this in 2 or 3 weeks, and that, I don't think that's going to be good for America. I'm really hoping that there's a decisive victory. There's the slim option of what I call option 2.5, where Joe Biden has a decisive victory, but I just can't see that happening right now. I mean, a lot of the polls say Joe Biden's up, but he's basically out there campaigning to 8 cars and 6 pumpkins. And his running mate is even less popular than he is. So I could conceivably imagine Joe Biden winning. I can't really imagine a Joe Biden presidency, but I can imagine him winning, but I can't imagine him having a decisive victory. So I'd call this the 2.5 option. So option one is Donald Trump has a decisive victory. Option two is it's a really close election and we're still counting in a couple of weeks. Option 2.5 is Joe Biden has a decisive victory, but that doesn't seem likely. And option three is the scary option. It's what they call the blue switch. If you don't know what the blue switch is, you don't read left-wing media, and you don't live in Orange County. I don't live in Orange County, and if you're a Californian or you're old enough to remember California politics when California politics were mainly Republican, you probably think of Orange County as Republican country because it was Republican country back in, I guess, the 1960s and the 70s and the early 80s and the early 90s. It isn't anymore, and it happened because of what we call in California the blue switch. Midterm elections 2018. 9 o'clock at night. Looked pretty good for Republicans in Orange County. kind of like normal because Republicans usually win in Orange County because, as people say, it's Orange County. It was always Republican country. And yeah, every 2 years it would get a little tighter and a little tighter and a little tighter. But in 2018, the Republicans were still winning in Orange County. And at around 9 o'clock at night, which is when most conservatives in California go to bed because we're an aging community in California and conservatives go to bed early, it looked good for Republicans in Orange County. And as far as I can tell, all the Republicans went to bed at around 10 o'clock at night. And then the next morning, something odd had happened. It was the blue switch. Suddenly, most, maybe all the Republicans in Orange County had lost. They found extra mail-in ballots. It's the blue switch. And a lot of people have been really worried about this ever since because traditionally, Republicans are better at doing mail-in ballots than Democrats are. So you don't really, if you're a Republican, think too much about the mail-in ballot situation changing an election because traditionally Democrats vote at the polls and Republicans are more likely to do mail-in ballots, especially in a place like California where a lot of Republicans are older and maybe don't drive or maybe they're having a hip replacement on election day for some reason. But the blue switch happened in Orange County in 2018, and there are now people who are much more important than I am talking about the blue switch happening in an entire state in 2020. Like maybe next week on Election Day, Donald Trump will be leading in Pennsylvania by 8 points. But maybe by the next day, he'll only be leading by 4 points. And maybe 2 weeks later when they finish counting, well, maybe Joe Biden will be up 20 points. And I'm like, you shouldn't have that much of a spread. You shouldn't have that much of a spread in the count because it doesn't really seem that likely to me. But there are people talking about a blue switch. So if you're interested in American democracy, if you're a conservative, if you just don't like people to lie, maybe stay up late on election night and keep watching because you don't want the blue switch to happen at 2 a.m. You don't want to wake up and find out that the guy you thought won didn't really win because some bureaucrat whose name you don't know just sort of found a bunch of extra ballots somewhere. So these are the 3 options we may be facing in the next week or 2, or maybe right up until Christmas of 2020, because who knows? So maybe we'll have a decisive win for one candidate or the other. Maybe it'll be really tight, and maybe we'll face a blue switch. And for the record, red switches never happen because Republicans don't do that sort of thing, especially not in the some of the inner ward Philly areas because there are no Republicans there. It's kind of like some of the districts in California. There are 8 Republicans. Republicans are not the problem because there aren't any Republicans, but maybe Republicans going to bed too early on election night is a problem for American democracy because we should all stay up late. If you enjoyed this, if you're not too scared, if I didn't fearmonger too much, please subscribe to A Different View because we're going to try and give you a different view for as long as we can. Thank you.